Hey, Zach. Hey, Maya.
Hey,
Hello.
What's up? Welcome to the Astrology Show. Well, welcome back, Amaya. Welcome,
Oh,
Zach.
thank you.
thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited too. Let's start out by doing some introductions. Amaya, you joined us last season to talk about fixed stars with Oscar. Um, that was I didn't expect that episode to do as well as it did in terms of like seeping into the astro universe and sort of like everyone's into fixed stars now.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, it's been
Exciting.
wild to watch how many people talk about it on Twitter. And I caved this morning and opened an Instagram account after being told by like multiple
Yay.
people.
Yes.
So I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see what will come up on there as well. But yeah, you've been so generous to have me on a second time. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. So, why don't you, for those who have not tuned in yet, why don't you share your SMR if you're comfortable with that and tell us a little bit more about your practice?
So I'm an Aquarius sun, Cancer moon, Scorpio rising. And gosh, I don't know what I said last time, so I'm not even going to attempt to recreate it. But I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this for a while, and my perspective, I guess, is a little unique because I'm also an animist. So I really try to bring it back to having relation with the world, both seen and unseen, both in what we'd consider to be mundane ways as well as magical ways. And I incorporate a lot of different stuff into my practice. It's really grounded in traditional techniques, but also I do fixed star parents and a few other things. So that's just the nutshell of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Zach, welcome.
Thank you.
Um, tell us about you. Tell us about your SMR
Yes.
and about your astrology practice.
Sure. Sun in Aquarius, Moon in Aries, and Gemini rising.
Cool.
And my practice, so yeah, I'm also a professional astrologer. Definitely, I focus on traditional astrology as well. I do consulting, do readings, as well as being the board secretary for the Association for Young Astrologers. And then, of course, with you, Kirah, I am the communications manager for Fresh Voices in Astrology.
Yes. And we've been working together, I guess, since last summer on that.
Yeah.
Which is wild that it's already, coming up to a year in a couple of months, which is weird.
Yeah.
But
It's been
and
incredible.
then
Yeah.
you too. So Amaya teaches a class, and Zach, you were in that class, right? And that's kind of
I
how you
was.
guys
Yeah.
connected,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, we connected kind of online a little bit, like on
Right.
Twitter, and then I just like knew I wanted to be. It's kind of like a similar way that happened with you, you and me, Kirah, where I was just like, I know I want to be this person's friend. We need to be BFFs. So I actually, in this case, with Amaya, I was like, I'm gonna have a reading with her. We're gonna talk, and then we're gonna be best friends. And then I took her class as well because, yeah, I mean, Amaya's class is really incredible. Of course, I've like been studying for quite a while, but her approach, using animism, using like really engaging with the planets, as like, actual, really believing that, they are entities and we're communicating with them. And when we're in relation, that's when we can really, I mean, honestly, we can learn so much from the planets by hearing from them, right? From understanding them, from them asking them to show us in our life who they are, what they're like, who are their children, what they're kind of focused on. And so I think in my kind of in this year, I've been trying to really hard to kind of like reconceptualize my astrology, and I kind of didn't know where I wanted to go or what I needed. I felt like there was something missing in my knowledge, but and I think. And once I started Amaya's class or heard about Amaya's class, that's when I was like, oh, okay, this is what I need. I needed the kind of let's go outside, kind of look at the sky and get more connected to the entities themselves. And that's why it really like expanded my mind and made it so much better for me in kind of expanding my knowledge of astrology. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're gonna talk about why Amaya is like so great for that.
Yes. Oh my
You
gosh.
guys are making me almost tear up over here. Thank you so much.
Oh, the Cancer moon's coming
Cancer
out.
moon ting.
Okay,
Right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God, the Scorpio rising wants to hide now. I have to go to the bathroom suddenly.
No, I mean, yeah, you're great. You're both great. And yeah, so Amaya and I, we met through I guess through like it was early on in quarantine when
Mm.
there was a lot of like astrologer Zoom
Oh yes,
hangs
of
like
course.
in April of 2020. And that was like the first time I became aware of you. And I was like, oh my gosh, who is this person? How
Oh
did
my
I not know about
gosh.
them? So
No.
smart. You know all the things.
Oh my gosh, no, but you were the coolest. She would just like walk into these Zoom meetings, and she'd been like in another Zoom meeting, but it was a party. So she'd like have party gear on, and she was like vibing and listening to music and like dancing. She's like, "What's up, guys?" I'm like, I am not that chill. I'm so jealous. Like,
It's all the weed I smoke.
look, I smoke too, and I'm not like that. You have something special. You brought a vibe every single time. She'd
Always
like just
vibes.
walk in and she would like take over. She'd just be like, I had this idea. And she's vibing while she's listening to her music and telling us her idea. And I was just completely hypnotized. So feeling is so mutual.
Pisces rising, man. Really
Yeah.
She
all
really brought it. It was so Pisces. I was like, she's a Pisces rising. I didn't even know anything about you. I was like, that's gotta be Pisces.
And yeah, Zach and I met through Twitter.
Mhm.
It's like either I meet people through Twitter or I meet them at NORWAC 2020 or NORWAC 2019.
Yeah.
But yeah, we met like around this time last year. You hit me
Mhm.
up on Twitter. It was right before everything hit because you were like, we should hang out before you move to California. And then yeah.
And then all of it happened.
And
So
then
then
everything happened.
Yeah. And then, then we had our little, like when Venus went into Gemini, that's when we started to have, everyone had those like Zoom calls kind of all together.
Yeah.
And then we had our little crew get together. And yeah, we had that, like all those discussions, and now we still talk every single day.
Yeah, it's been nonstop basically. I mean, yeah, March, April of last year really kind of brought in the whole like I talk to astrologers every day of my life sort of thing.
Yep.
Which I'm very, very happy about. Not mad about it at all. So we're talking about the third house and the ninth house today. And I've been like stoked, honestly, like out of all of the houses, out of all, like we're doing a whole series on these, right? But out of all of the sort of house combinations, this is the one I'm most excited about because I think it's one that people don't talk about enough. And it's like, yeah, the third house and the ninth house sort of, they're not the most like exciting on paper, right? Like you don't, it's not like relationships or like career or whatever. But it's so important. And especially when we get into talking about what we do, right? As readers, diviners, witches, if you will. That's where we find that's where we find our type of people. So I'm excited to talk about all that. And to get started, I think we should just sort of lay out what the third and ninth axis is like, because these are two houses that oppose each other. And yeah, I just kind of want to talk about sort of generally like the third and the ninth, like we can talk about cadent houses and just what we find in both of those houses, and then we'll get into the specifics of the third and the specifics of the ninth. But just to let everyone know, the reason why I asked both Zach and Amaya here today is because they both have third and ninth house stelliums. So Amaya is like a third house goddess with a third house stellium in Capricorn. And then Zach has a ninth house stellium in Aquarius, where his chart ruler is, and his sun and something else.
Saturn in my midheaven.
Yeah, in the midheaven. More than just those two. And I also have a ninth house stellium with my sun, Mars, Pluto conjunction, Pallas Athene's there too. Asteroid Arachne. Yeah, so I have a whole ninth house story as well. So yeah, we are well equipped to talk about these two houses. I'm excited to get into it. So cadent houses, right? The ninth and the third. Anyone want to start out by just kind of defining cadent houses? Yeah, Maya, you go.
Well, I think this is important because I actually went back. If anyone ever wants like the best lectures in the world about the houses, is Demetra George's lectures. So I went back and I was re-listening to the third house one because I swear to God, every time I listen to it, and I've probably listened to it 10 times, I learned something new. It's always something I've missed or something that suddenly pops into my head. And the thing that always gets me about cadent houses is that they didn't call them cadent until later in the tradition. The word that they used was actually metakosmios, which actually meant the interspace between worlds.
Yes.
And for these guys in particular, that is a very important thing because they literally were considered houses of divination, but two very different ways of divining. And so one is ruled by the sun or Helios, and the other, well, we could say it's the sun's joy, not ruled by, right? We don't do ABCs, but it's the sun's joy, and that's a ninth house. And that was Helios, and it's direct divination. This is like prophecies, visions, suddenly coming into contact with the gods and being told what to do. This is Moses going up on the mountain and bringing down the tablets.
Yes.
Right. And then the third house was called the goddess, and it was the joy of the moon. Or I'm not going to pronounce the Greek correctly. If any classicist is watching me, please don't like murder me in the comments, but Selene is what I'm going to say.
Wait, how else would you pronounce it? I always pronounce it Selene.
Demetra George. Selene, I think.
Selene. Ooh, I'm into it. Okay.
I'm into it too, but I'm Midwestern and that's just not going to happen. So, you know, and the goddess, and I think this is important, they were interplaying, right? And it always reminds me of when you think about the Delphic Oracle, which was the Oracle of Apollo, the sun god. It wasn't someone who was up on the roof of like this building in the sun, right? It was actually a woman sitting in the inner chamber over a chasm where water was intermixing with volcanic gases. And she was getting visions in this dark space and then like uttering them to people who would then translate them. And so even though she was a solar oracle, she was down in this chthonic place. And that's really what I got away with just sitting here and re-listening to it. Was like, oh yeah, it's because the moon reflects the light of the sun. So it is bringing the divination of the gods from up top back into the earth. And this is where you get indirect divination. So like tarot or I Ching or astrology, right? Now, astrology is also a ninth house topic because it deals with the sky. But even dream divination goes for both. But dream divination originally, if you go far enough back, starts in the third house and eventually makes it up to the ninth house. And I see it as a both. Right. And I think that these both, by the way, I have my moon in the ninth. So like it's my satellite leader, right? Like I think they interplay together. You have to have both. It's not one or the other. And so it's really important to have both perspectives. You have the solar and the lunar, like solar being this bigger, higher picture, direct connection with the gods. And then lunar being like this reflective, seeing signs and symbols around you in the world. And that's now Zacc can go, oh my God, that's your class, right? Because that's what I'm teaching everybody to do. How do you see the planets in the world around you is a big question I ask all my students.
Of course.
Let's pull it back a little bit and sort of define cadency, metakosmios. I love that word so much. Yeah, Gabe Rosas loves to use that word. Because he's just such a, he's so tied to the tradition. We have to get him back on. But anyway, so hey Gabe, if you're listening, hi.
Hey, Gabe. We love Gabe.
We all love Gabe. So yeah, the cadent houses, the third house, the sixth house, the ninth and the 12th houses are metakosmios is what they were originally referred to as back in ancient times, which means the space between worlds, or like that dwelling space in between spaces, I guess, in between worlds. And cadent houses, let's see, how do we even break this down? Like, well, I guess what I'll say about cadency is we have the angular houses, which, our last episode, or not the last episode, our first episode of this series, about, the angular houses, the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th. And those are the pillars of the chart. Those like hold, almost like the tent poles. They like hold everything into place. And then we have the succedent houses that come after cadent houses. So the second house, the fifth, the eighth, and the 11th. And those follow those follow the angular houses. And it's almost like those are support houses. So they sort of like prop up the angles almost. It's almost like the ground underneath the tent poles that make it so the angular houses can stay steady. And then we have the cadent houses, and yeah, these are these transition spaces where we're going from succedent. It's that in between like before we get to the next angular house. It's that transition space before the pivot comes in the angular house. So the third and ninth houses in particular are cool because they aspect the ascendant by really helpful aspects. So the third house has a sextile to the first house, the ascendant, and the ninth house has a trine, and that's like an overcoming trine, meaning it's above the ascendant, and so it's sort of like casting this like lovely 120-degree angle to the first house and ascendant. I'm sort of using interchangeably here because it's always going to be in the first house, the ascendant. But yeah, so that makes the fact that the third and the ninth are in good aspect to the ascendant speaks to the fact that they are quote unquote good houses. So the ancients, there was a lot of I wouldn't say that they would say things are good or bad. It was very like fated, a lot of astrology from back in this time. So yeah, we're using terms like good and bad, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not really a value judgment, I'll say. But what it does mean is that they're supportive of the life. Basically, they support the life in some way, shape, or form. And so yeah, and Amaya pointed out that the third house is where the moon has its joy, where the ninth house is where the sun has its joy. And we can talk about that a little bit later when we get into the third and the ninth individually. But I sort of just want to talk about some of the like overall themes of this axis in general. We'll find things like travel, spirituality, religion, teaching, learning, like we said, divination. Anything else coming to mind with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with travel, it's like, the ninth house is those things that are beyond, those things are far away. So foreign lands, right? As opposed to the third house being our local area, our neighborhood, and that like short distance travel, the places we kind of like go that are closer to us. Yes, absolutely. Like, that same thing of, yeah, absolutely learning where, third house tends to be that early education kind of learning, K through 12 or pre-K to 12 learning. And then, the ninth is asking us, in discussing learning, it's asking us for more, going beyond the basics, going back beyond the fundamentals, and asking to go like think beyond, ask bigger questions. So that can be higher education, just anything beyond. I think that like what like learning those fundamentals. Certainly divination, astrology, which many people see astrology as divination, witchcraft. And I think the occult was originally in the space that like there's kind of more of a new understanding that occult might be also described in the eighth, but I've really understood it to be more of a ninth house thing.
It
topic.
certainly is, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, mystery schools used to be considered colleges. They were not considered what we have today, which is like we're the weirdos.
Right.
If you went to a mystery school, you were going to be considered a very learned person, a very respected person. So it's very much like back in the day, it was ninth house. Today, it'd probably be more like 12th house. Because it's like, I hope nobody catches me doing this.
Yeah,
Like...
exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. It's, I think it was put into the eighth house because it's considered quote unquote mysterious or like dark. It's stuff that happens underneath, behind the scenes where traditionally the stuff wasn't happening behind the scenes. I mean, it might have been happening like, not like in town square, but but like it wasn't something that was necessarily like taboo, which is what a lot of people say eighth house topics are.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So third and ninth houses, again, we're finding things like, learning, using the mind in some way, shape, or form. We get the religion, spirituality, teaching, learning, and then travel. let's get into the third house. Let's talk, because I think it's really hard to talk about them together and not get into the specifics.
I know. Yeah.
One thing I did want to say, do I go on my rant now or later?
Go on your rant.
Yeah,
Let's do this.
I mean, oh yeah, sorry.
You know what? No, I'm going to do it afterwards because
Okay.
I want to kind of talk about the third and ninth house first, and then people will understand why I want to rant about it. And just so you guys know ahead of time, I want to rant about how the work that we do as diviners and spiritualists is work, it is labor, and how the cadent houses do speak to a certain type of work or labor often.
Absolutely.
We're going to get into that more in the 6th and 12th house episode as well, but just so you know that is coming at a certain point in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, just in general for cadent houses too, it's like Austin Coppock, I love like way he's described this, where the cadent houses are those that where we like all of them have the topics of things that we have to do, and you know, when we have planets there too, those things that we have to do to kind of like get to neutral, right? So so those are the so like I mean like the 6th house being, I mean obviously you're going to talk about this, but just like in general, like the 6th house is like is in, you know, it's below the horizon, so those are things that are in the earth or below the earth, so those are like usually grounded things. So that's like 6th house is like illness and like do what we need to do to maintain like not become ill. I love Amaya's like thing that she throws out always with the 6 is like work-life balance, right? If you work too much, then you are imbalanced. And then the 12th being those things that we have to kind of work through to allow ourselves to be healthy mentally, and that's like in the sky, right? The 3rd house being those things in our neighborhood, those like kind of those things around us that we have to kind of get done to kind of just do and get through life and do the things that we to maintain our life. And the 9th kind of, the 9th house is a really interesting one because the work is existential in a sense, where you're like, what do I believe and why? And what does that mean and how do I live my life? And so and I think that in your upcoming rant, like that's the key part of why astrology is work, because that like connecting, if we're really taking it there, if we're connecting with the gods or connecting with the planets, that is work. That takes energy. You are putting in a lot of energy and time and resources perhaps in just kind of contemplating and questioning and engaging, and that is also work. Like thinking is also work. Engaging in that way, and
any
that
type of
spirituality
mental,
is so much work.
It's exactly.
Even though it's not obviously physical, right?
Not
like it's not under
even
the
if
earth.
it's not physical, but the mental can manifest like the mental work, the mental labor can manifest physically. And that we will definitely talk about that. But yeah, let's get into the 3rd house. Let's take a little field trip, which is very 3rd house phrase. Field trip to the 3rd house. So the 3rd house, as we said before, has a sextile to the ascendant. It's like 2 signs away from the ascendant. And it is the joy of the moon. It's where the moon finds its joy. And you can think about like when the sun is in the 3rd house, like the time of night, that is, it's around like 3-4 a.m., around basically the witching hour. 3 a.m. when the sun gets to the 3rd house. And there's, when we're talking about the 3rd house too, Zach brought this up, it's subterranean, it's underneath the earth, underneath the horizon. So things that go on in there are maybe perhaps hidden or just, happen sort of underneath the surface. There's another quality of it being like things being terrestrial, meaning like physical.
Right.
We're talking about like like the physical space around you. And well, okay, actually, let me pull back a little bit. Amaya, do you have anything to say about like the moon having its joy there, especially because you are a lunar 3rd house person?
Yeah. So just to kind of have a bit of a setup here, when it comes to like 3rd house, 9th house and how they're juxtaposed, the way that I look at it is like 2 descriptions that help me out really quick. Like mundanely, I call the 3rd house the house of relating. That's your local space, your neighborhood, your local news, going to school when you're a kid, your cousins, your siblings. You learn how to relate to the world. And in that, you actually help yourself become independent because it's that sextile with the first house, but the first house is overcoming, right? So it is like, I'm having these experiences to learn how to individuate. So very, very mundane. Ninth house, I call it the house of like big picture. These are peak experiences in our life, spiritual experiences, going overseas or long distance travels for the first time, going to college. These are things that change you fundamentally and change how you perceive the world. And so those are just the mundane ones. The third house, when I talk about it spiritually, I call it the house of praxis. And I call the ninth house the house of theory. So I think about ninth house as like, oh, I went to seminary and I learned everything about theology. But then the third house, let's say that that seminary was Catholic and you go through catechism and you go through all the steps, right? It's very, very formal. But you get to the third house, it's like having Lady Guadalupe in your doorway and saying the rosary when you need it, right? It is about immediacy. It is definitely usually a very practical thing because I think it was, I was talking with, oh my goodness, there we go.
I just pulled up the houses wheel that I made, and I'll link to be able to download this.
Seen this before.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to pull this up.
No worries.
For
I was like, what is
video.
this? So, you know, with the third house, as it pertains to like the goddess and witchcraft and like the moon, it really comes down to a quote that my friend Jason, you've had him on the podcast before, Jason Kai. I'm probably not saying it right.
I think it's Kai.
You know, he had been talking with me and he was like, how you do something is how you do everything. And I think that's really the third house in a nutshell is it's like, yeah, these are things that we have to do. And it's probably also because I have a Capricorn stellium and I'm very much about quality. But like how you do most of the things in your life really reflects a lot of that big picture stuff in the ninth. And if you don't have that ninth house really sorted, the third house doesn't really fall in line either. And so this also comes back to the moon reflecting the light of the sun. If the sun is in its joy in the ninth house, then the moon needs that light to help bring it back to earth because she is the great translator of light in traditional astrology. And so when we talk about the moon being in joy there, what it really is she also was conflated with, the Greeks would have called it Thea or Rhea or Dea, as the Romans would call it. And then eventually it became Demeter. And actually that was one of the things I really loved about learning about this was the fourth house being the house of Hades. And that third house falling away is Demeter planting a seed down in that soil so that it can burst forth over the next two houses and get boom, individuated, right? And so when we talk about the moon there, the moon is all about nurturing and growth, but it's not an easy process. Like actual growth and nurturing is work.
Yeah, right.
And if you don't take those ninth house ideas and actually put them into practice, they're just ideas. And so you need to have both. It is a reflection of one and the other together. The third house and witchcraft and like the moon is like, okay, what if you can't make it to the priest? Do you need to interface with a mediator between you and the gods? And the third house says, no, I am a reflection of that light above too. And I can bring it into this earth too. And I can have that relationship too. Now, some people might find that more difficult than others. That comes down to their individual charts. And then they might go to a ninth house person like Zacc and say, help, I can't interface with the gods that easily. Can you help me with figuring out what my practice should be? Right. But that comes down to me. Well, Kirah, you're like the channel, right? That ninth house stuff.
I'm way too, yeah. I'm very, my third house is empty, totally empty. And it's ruled by, you know, Venus in the eighth. And so it's hard for me to connect to third house stuff often because it's sort of like the ruler is like hidden. It does not see the ruler of my ninth. It's like completely averse. And so, yeah, like I've gotten readings from both Zacc and Amaya and I get readings often, even though I'm like the ninth house reader person. And I can see, you know, quote unquote, see a lot being a ninth house person, but the practical, I call the third house practical magic, and the witchcraft part of it can be more difficult for me to tap into.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon. When I finally put up that I was doing like spirituality and magical readings for people, I started getting a bunch of them, and I was really kind of shocked at that. But so many people feel very, very lost in that third house praxis. Part of it being that right now we're in a time period where we've really venerated the peak experiences over everything else. And so we're expecting every time we sit down to pray to like have like this vision of God, and then your candle blows up and you're going to like, it's like, no, most spirituality, real spirituality is actually quite mundane.
Super
the third
mundane.
house, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And like, it's good to have, we need those peak experiences. That's kind of like Moses going up and being like, if you're real, show me. And then the bush burns and you're like, okay, I got you. Got it.
Yeah.
And now what do? We can't just live in peak experiences. And I think that's the thing, just to roll back really quick. When we talk about metacosmos, what they're really referring to, as Dimitri George defined it, is like altered states that aren't necessarily conducive to worldly affairs. Right? So like if we're constantly divining, remembering to eat is hard. Or remembering like, oh yeah, I forgot to do my laundry, but I've been sitting, and I do this all the time because my moon is still up in the 9th house. Like I've been sitting here studying something for hours and I've forgotten to move, right? That third house stuff really needs a little bit of assistance sometimes, especially if you don't have a really great ruler, or it's averse, or you've got some afflictions going on. That's why we do things like remediation too. So it can help us with some of those everyday things.
Definitely. Yeah. Like for me, my third house being ruled by Venus and Libra, Venus magic is by far like the most type of magic I do and the prayers I do. And like me and Venus are like this. Because and that started when my third house is Taurus. So my progress moon and ascendant moves into Taurus around this time last year, like within a month of one another.
Oh, that's right.
And so I've been like finally kind of tapping into third house Venus stuff a lot more ever since that transition happened. So I love that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about third house type people. Because I mean, Amaya is very much a third house type of person, but I want to talk a little bit about like, one of my favorite words or phrases for the third house is technical skills. Because outside of like, the magic divining part, what you find in the third house is where like your skills, like what you're good at. And it's not necessarily like, everything you're good at. You could be good at a lot of different things, but in particular, I kind of describe the third house as like the ways in which you interact with the world around you, like your local space. And local space could mean like your literal like space. It could mean your neighborhood, the city that you live in. But yeah, it's how you're like interacting in a very like material level a lot of the times, because we're talking about the moon, we're talking about matter, we're talking about subterranean terranean stuff, terra, earth stuff. So what I find when we talk about third house people, when people have, and I'll define what I mean by third house people. So I mean people whose sun or moon is there, especially if it's the sect leader. If their chart ruler is in the third house, meaning the planet that rules their ascendant, or if they have a stellium in the third house, like 3 or more planets there, there's going to be an emphasis there. So that's what I mean by third house people. And when I see that, what I see often, like the two number one things that I see. Number one, writers. So many writers are third house people. And writing is one of those things where it's like a skill that you develop over time, and it's how you kind of like communicate with the world around you. So definitely see writers there a lot. I see coders in the third house, like computer programmers, software like I don't know tech words, but like coder, like anyone who's working in like tech basically, like and doing sort of like the the coding work, I guess. Lots of
Yeah.
typing, editors, things like that. People
Mm.
who are kind of like on the computer a lot. It doesn't have to be computer, but just in this example, like it's people who can develop a skill, and usually it's like you're developing that skill over time, and then that's like your thing. That's like the thing that you use most often in your day-to-day life to sort of like navigate your the world or your space. But again, in this very like micro type of way, because I think of the third
Mhm.
house is micro, the ninth house being the macro. So yeah, that's one thing. And I have to give this example because I give it to all my clients when I talk about the third house. One of my favorite third house examples is I have a friend named John Gardner. He is also a Scorpio rising with the Capricorn third house stellium, like Amaya. But so he's a Capricorn sun. And so therefore he's a night chart, and his rising sign is Scorpio. His the ruler of his rising sign is Mars in Capricorn. So he has an
Mhm.
exalted first
Lucky.
house ruler. I know.
Lucky.
He's like,
What?
and he has a seventh house Taurus moon. Like, it's just too nice.
Oh, wow.
Oh
He's
my
kind of like
gosh.
the best person.
I'm gonna mug him for his chart.
I'm sure he'd be down to share too. But yeah, so he's ruled by this exalted planet that's like, insect um in the third house, along with a bunch of other his third house stellium, like I said. And what he does is he's a pro skateboarder. Okay, so
Mm.
he is his skill is like he's an incredible skateboarder, and that's how he moves, that's how he gets around the world. That's like a skill that he uses every day to literally like maneuver himself through the world. And it makes a lot of sense because it's Mars. It's a very risky sort of like, it can be very dangerous sport, right? But he is so highly skilled in it. And it's sort of like, it's almost as if like the skateboard is like another limb for him.
Mm.
And he's really good at it. It's like the exalted night chart Mars. So yeah, that's just another example I like to give. But Amaya is very much a third house person.
Mhm.
And yeah. Do you guys have thoughts about third house type of people?
Yeah, I mean, I always see third house people or people with, like yeah, people with, so definitely their ascendant ruler there or sextile or stelliums there. They're doers. Like, I don't know, I guess my mom has actually a similar chart to your friend John, where she's a Scorpio rising, a night chart, Scorpio rising with Mars in Capricorn in the third. And she gets shit handled, like always, nonstop, keeps going. Like, let's get that handled. Let's do this. Let's do that. Do
Yeah.
this. Like
It's a
in
busy
her,
house.
it's very busy, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
think, if we're going back to the idea of cadent, right? Cadency isn't like super, doesn't mean that planet is like super visible. It means that planet is very busy. Like no matter which cadent house it is, it's like a very busy planet that has to do a lot of work just to get to neutral. And so
Yeah.
the third house really requires a lot, requires a lot of what is of its ruler and also of the planets that are there. So you find people who have a lot of planets there that they just do so much and they get so much done because they have to. Like, there's just like perhaps there's a requirement in their life that requires them to go, hey, I'm gonna get that, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. I'm always really jealous of people who have third house stelliums because I'm a ninth house stellium who's like in the sky, in the clouds, like constantly thinking. So the functional care tasks are something that I actually have a really hard time with because I'm constantly in my head. So I have to like being subterranean or being Terranean is difficult because I'm so in the clouds sometimes.
I
But
so relate to that.
but it's
Like a day chart upper hemisphere person.
yeah,
Yeah, we have trouble with that sometimes.
yeah. But I will say one thing too is that it depends obviously on the condition of the planets that are there, or like whether they're benefic or malefic planets that are in the third. But one difference is, I guess, for me, I have Jupiter in the third, and if we're thinking about neighborhood, I have always created either relationships with people around, like in my neighborhood. I always find a bar that like, and then I befriend all of the bartenders, right? And then like, they are my friends. I have that one shop I go to all the time. They know my name, I know theirs. We're close friends. Like I have a flower shop person, I have like my like wine store person, and we like talk, like they order things for me, or like we put together, you know, like one day for Venus Day, I like put together like 5 gorgeous bouquets
I
with the local
remember
florist and
that.
spent like 2 hours with her, like designing different things, because I just like was making friends and I wanted to do these kinds of, so like for me, Jupiter is my benefic sect, right? So in a day chart, Jupiter is one of the, like, you know, is the most positive, is said
And
to
it
be the
rules
most positive planet.
relationships for you. So
It does. Yes. So I literally create intimate yes, it rules my 7th. So that Jupiter does. So that 7th house ruler being in the 3rd, I create intimate relationships with the people around me, the people in my neighborhood, in my sphere. And so I've had a lot of, just in a basic signification of Jupiter, like I've had a lot of luck with places, like with making those relationships with people around me. Usually I can befriend people quickly. And, like befriending bartenders is not always a skill that a lot of people have, but I'm just like capable of doing that, and like, and making those relationships. And so that's like a really positive like expression of someone having a good, like a really lovely planet in the 3rd, of being able to just create or like have a positive experience when you're going out and getting shit handled. Now, my, I guess I'll just bring up my mother again, whatever. But she, her having that Mars there, obviously it's a daytime Mars, or excuse me, it's a nighttime Mars. So it's exalted. So there's just a lot of strength there. But when she does those tasks, they are not enjoyable for her, right? Mars doesn't, like, even if Mars is productive and, is happy, it doesn't mean, like, when Mars is like happy getting things done in the 3rd, it doesn't mean you're necessarily enjoying that work. It's just like, I'm gonna get it handled. It's gonna work, but it's kind of like always a battle. I've noticed her always being like in battle, or in like, just like, it's like I'm like attacking the problems that she needs to go after. And I've noticed that in many people, just like when they have like either Mars in the 3rd, especially Mars in the 3rd, there's just kind of like a drive to like attack all of these tasks. So there really is that kind of juxtaposition of depending on like, or depending on what planets are there, it does really add flavor on how those experiences of getting errands done, even just those basic things, how you experience them. Are they enjoyable, or there's something that, like, kind of takes a lot of energy out of you?
Yeah, I always like to describe the cadent houses as like planets there are like treading water. It's like they like trying to stay afloat, basically. And so they are using a lot of energy just to like stay, keep their head above water, basically. And that often looks like a lot of things to do. It's a lot of things to juggle. And yeah, I mean, I feel like with thinking about the moon and how the moon is constantly transferring light and like gathering and collecting, and so yeah, it's like the moon's always busy for the most part. Unless the moon's void, it's like pretty busy. It just gets like a couple breaks every couple days.
I also think it really matters, like the modality, right? So like, if you
absolutely.
have a cardinal 3rd house, you probably do have 500 projects that you've initiated.
That's true.
Maybe not looking forward to finishing. If you have a mutable 3rd house, like you probably have a million projects that you're meandering back to over and over again until they reach completion. If you have a fixed 3rd house, then you're probably quite masterful at just a small handful of things because you've been doing them for a very long time. I have a client who's a cello player, and they've got a 3rd house stellium, and they have like Mercury and Venus and the sun, and it's beautiful because it's so literal, like Helios, or we should say Apollo, asking Mercury to go and find him the lyre, right? Go find me a new instrument. And like, it just represents that, Venus being the lover of things of pleasure and beauty. But like, they've spent their whole lives becoming a master of cello. Like that's not a small feat.
Right.
So that also makes a huge difference too. And yes, she does slave over this craft of hers.
Right.
She's very busy. She has lots of, even through the quarantine, she still had lots to record in her home studio and things like that for different events. And so it's still very busy, but it's not something where she's being kind of wandering all over the place, Whereas like for myself, I get asked to do a lot of projects. This is the year I have to learn how to say no. And it's very difficult because I can usually drive the project about 75% of the way. And then my poor Mars and Taurus just keeps dragging me, kicking and screaming until I finish it. And I have another client who's got a mutable third house that's like really busy. And
Mhm.
I swear to God, they've got probably 500 projects and eventually they'll all get finished one day.
Right.
They wander back and forth and meander. And that's like kind of like, I envy it. And then I also go, oh no, I'd lose it.
Yeah.
I would lose my mind. I'm too fixed and cardinal for that. So,
Yeah.
but I'm also really impressed because I'm like, how? That's so many plates in the air. How?
Yeah, I see that a lot with people with mutable, or sorry, just like a lot of either like cadent grand cross or like just like, yeah, lots of mutable planets in cadent houses. And they're just sort of like, what's the image? I have this, it's like an image of like trying to juggle too many things and just like, like that, like anxiety you watch when someone's juggling like 18 things. Like,
Yeah.
Another part of the third house that we haven't talked much about, two things. One being siblings and extended family, and the other being travel. We kind of talked about travel a little bit, but I think these two things tie into one another, because traditionally, back in ancient times, like there wasn't like normal everyday people weren't traveling very often. You know, there you would be around your local space, like your village, your neighborhood, whatever. But usually when you would go outside of that space, it was to visit relatives. Like, you know, there wasn't like, you know, there weren't like vacations and stuff. So, so yeah, a big part of the third house is this extended family, like the family that isn't in your necessarily like home. And then also siblings is honestly like one of the primary significations of the third house. Not everyone has siblings, obviously, but just in my case, like I have older siblings who I didn't grow up with from my dad's previous marriages, but I have a younger sister that I grew up with. And you know, as I said, my third house is Taurus. It's ruled by Venus and Libra. And my sister's rising sign is Libra, and her ascendant is the exact same degree as my natal Venus. So it's like very, very clear, just like right there. The planet that represents my little sister is Venus, and it's at the same degree as her ascendant. And she's Venusian, and I'm pretty sure her natal Venus like sextiles my Venus or something too. So it can be very literal like that. Oftentimes, especially, are both of you only children?
Oh no.
You're not. Okay. So yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you're the stellium, it wouldn't make sense. But yeah, I know Zacc is.
Well, I have stepbrothers, but
Oh, you
yes, I did
stepbrother.
grow
Okay,
up for
okay.
a period of time. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of like, yeah, growing up. What was I about to say? Yeah, oftentimes I was gonna say like with Gemini risings in particular, it's interesting to see the sibling dynamics with them because the sun rules the third house. And so there tends to be this like very close association with the sibling. And yeah, you know, because the sun rules the third, and that's always interesting, like whether it's like look a lot alike or you just like, you know, were really close growing up or what have you. I I have clients sometimes that have like third house stelliums and or like a really really like lovely benefic planet in the third house or ruling the third, and some of them just have these like amazing relationships with their siblings.
Yeah.
And it would be like they grew up in a really difficult home environment, but like their bond with their sibling is what, or their siblings is what keeps them like, it's like the best, some of the best parts about their lives, like and I just always find that to be really, really sweet. And of course, you know, you can find difficult sibling relationships by looking at the third house and the ruler to the third. Perhaps there's an aversion, you know, between the ruler of the third and the ruler of the first, and you don't really like have a relationship with the sibling. So yeah, I just wanted to bring up siblings. Amaya, do you have anything to add since you have the third house stellium?
Well, I mean, I have Saturn and Venus in my stellium. Yes, definitely grew up in a very interesting household. And I was the eldest. So Saturn there. I took care of them and very much raised my siblings. because
many
of
do you
Saturn.
have?
I have two. I have a younger sister and brother, and I think it's hysterical because, you know, the ruler of my third house is in the third house. And all three of us have Capricorn stelliums.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, even my brother, he's 5 years younger than me, but he came back at a time when it was like, oh, everything's there. Boom.
Yeah.
And I mean, everything. It's the wildest stellium I've ever seen in my life. But, you know, I grew up, I was much closer to him. His moon is conjoined my sun. So really, really close to him. Weirdly, me and my sister were not close growing up. And it is weird because we share the same birthday. She was just born two years after me.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So we have our suns like conjoined, but like a lot of differences in the stelliums and stuff. And she's a Virgo rising and I'm a Scorpio rising. I was pretty much seen kind of like mom. I think that's the combination of Venus and Saturn is like, it wasn't an unpleasant relationship, but it was still Saturnian. And
Nighttime Saturn, especially, right? Like the undue,
night Saturn.
like responsibility that's really like overpowering and overwhelming. Saturn.
Yes, it was at times. Yes, and it was very lonely. Because like, you know, you can't be mom and friend at the same time, or at least it's a very bad idea to do that. So like, you know, if they really had a problem, they'd actually come to me first rather than my parents. So if my sister was really, really freaked out about something or needed help, like she'd be like, help me. And I would help her out. And she still does that today, you know, like that's how our relationship works. And like my brother and I, we were close up to a point. And then when I became an adult and had to leave the house, there was like a weird separation that caused him a lot of pain because I was mommy in a lot of ways. So it's an interesting way to grow up. But I think that, again, it comes down to like, for example, you have Venus in its wonderful home of Libra as the ruler of your third house. So like that relationship with your sister is probably really, really good.
It's getting there. No, it's way better now that we're older, but like I have the aversion, like my ruler of my third is completely averse to me, to the ruler of my first. So yeah, it's interesting. Like my sister is a saint though. And she cooked for me so much during quarantine. And she really is like Venusian in that way, or she's just so giving and like, was always baking me like sweets and stuff and always making sure that I like had food. I have Venus moon opposition too. And so that's the way, like, yeah, it showed up a lot. Like she cared way more about like my well-being than my mom did. And would like make sure that I was eating and stuff. Cause I have, you know, she has like a second house. Does she have third house stuff? She has a lot of, you know, subterranean stuff that I don't. So she's way better at that stuff than I am.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like that's like making food for your siblings, you know, like that's what I did. Like I was cooking for them, or, you know, if they really needed help with homework, I would help them if my mom wasn't around to do that. So like in a lot of ways, and then my parents are both working most of the time. So I was babysitting them pretty much around the clock from a very young age. That definitely happens. Like my Venus is conjoined my brother's sun. And so that's like a very literal thing. We were very close and it was a very loving relationship. And he felt very seen in that relationship up to my leaving the house. And, you know, for my sister, I have my Saturn conjoined her Mercury. So like, I'm the one who like makes her think harder about things. I'm like, do you really think that's a good idea? Let's look a little further into this. But I'm, you know, I think because I have that Cancer moon, I'm not overbearing like a lot of Saturnian people can be at times, where I'm like, here's what I would think is a good idea, but you know, that's your choice.
Right.
And that was a little bit different than how we were raised, because our parents were definitely much more dictatorial. They both have Saturn and Aquarius, and they have two Aquarian children, and then a son that's got like his moon and Saturn in Aquarius. So like, you know, they were very much the Saturnian people in our lives, creating a very particular structure, not always very warm or flexible. And so
is your IC there too? Sorry to interrupt.
My IC is in the fourth house in Aquarius. Okay.
Yeah, that's another thing I just want to bring up quickly is that folks, a lot of folks have their IC in the third house as well. Yes. So that sensitive point, the nadir, that's opposite the midheaven. And sometimes that falls in the third house, whole sign third house, or the fifth house. Any like notes about that, like IC in the third? Does anyone have anything to say about that?
It's like those topics from the third get dragged into the fourth.
Yeah, on
'cause
topics
the
of the
fourth is
fourth
still the fourth.
dragged into the third either way. But yeah, um, I find that like neighborhood tends to be very, very important for people like that. Like just like needing to feel really comfortable in that space. It's not so much just about like the home, but even like the neighborhood and the city like takes on just more.
It's
It takes on
true.
more
in a
importance.
certain sense, it comes, I mean, because I have my IC in the third. I mean, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that in that, like, but that's so true. It's kind of like there's, and just in what you just said, Amaya, like obviously the IC being in the third brings those topics of the third into the fourth, right? And it's like, I haven't noticed this before, but yeah, my neighborhood is part of my home, right? Like, again, like part of why I think I'm so motivated to create relationships with my neighbors or with the surrounding business folk is because I feel that they are a part of like perhaps even a part of my family, right? Like I've created those relationships multiple times, sometimes where it's just like, we're super close. And it's like, it comes kind of out of nowhere. Like it just is like, I don't even think about it really at this point. I just like, I choose always where I want to live based on what the surrounding area is like.
I was going to say, you know what it made me think of? Like, you don't really decorate your home, right? Like, you're very sparse about it.
Which is ridiculous, but yes.
But then like, you are very into your neighborhood.
Yes.
Right. That's almost more important than like having the most comfortable and most like livable home is my neighborhood livable?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then
that's
those
really
people
cool,
kind of
though.
become like an extended family. It's like those are your siblings almost, like your I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's another thing I wanted to say. You know, for those who don't have siblings, you may have had friends that you were very close to that you met when you were younger who are like siblings. Like,
or cousins.
I felt like, or cousins. I didn't have cousins, but like I felt growing up, like my very best friend that she was born like 2 weeks before me, and my mom were like really good friends. She was more like my sister in a lot of ways because I wasn't having to be that Saturn person to her. And like, we literally up until like college were like inseparable at all times and like knew everything about each other. Right.
Yeah.
And if you find that like the ruler of your third house is say, somewhere else, you may find that people who are like those sibling type of relationships come from that place, you know? So that's a good thing to remember is like, you don't have to have actual physical family. You could also have people who kind of adopted you in, or you adopted them in, and it kind of gets enmeshed.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. It makes me think of my friend Molly, who was like one of my first like really, really, really close friends. And I was basically like absorbed into her family with her and her sister, and like went on trips with them and stuff. And she's a Taurus, you know, her sun falls into my third house. Definitely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Like third house is very much those people that are like siblings to you as well, generally speaking. And then, also you'll find your cousins there, any sort of extended family as well. Let's talk about the ninth house. Well, any other any final thoughts about the third?
One final one about travel.
Yes, travel.
If you love road trips, this is the house. Okay. I was addicted. I've been addicted to them my whole life. I've traveled most of my life now, and eventually went to my like ninth house moon and went overseas. But like, I literally, for most of my life in the United States, my favorite thing to do was to go on road trips. Like that was very Venusian for me. That was the relaxing and having fun. And weirdly enough, because it's a very third house thing, I find I love really small little podunk towns with diners. I want to go to like every diner. And I love getting to know like the environment, you know. Now that's not for every single sign, I would say. Like I have a very earthy third house. So I'm very much like, I want to be around the trees and the rocks, and I want to see all the like, you know, beautiful sightseeing stuff that's very natural. But for other people, it could be very social if you have a very airy third house. For other people, it could be like, how does it make me feel? What's the vibe? And that's a very like watery third house, right? But like, what makes you feel good when you go on those short road trips and what you seek out are typically going to be dictated by that sign and its ruler. So like my very Saturnian third house, I'm like, what is the history of this? And usually like, we're talking like geology type history. Like,
Yeah.
what period of the Jurassic era was this rock in? You know,
So
like,
Capricorn.
Spot on, right? I was like, Saturn and Capricorn. There you go.
I love it.
what dead thing can I call up here? So yeah, you know, third house definitely more about like your local travel. Like when I lived in New Orleans, I would get onto the streetcar, and that's how I
commuting,
traveled almost
absolutely.
exclusively. I love pedestrian cities. It's my favorite thing. I want to slow down. Very Saturnian of me. I want to slow down and like take it in.
Yeah.
But like definitely like your local travel, your short distance travels. And when we say short distance, it's kind of hard to gauge in the United States, I find, because we can literally road trip 3 states over.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could say that when we're talking about short distance, could you get there in a day?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well, I think, you know, I guess we're in Mercury retrograde territory at the moment. I've really noticed that when you have Mercury retrograde in your transiting Mercury retrograde in your third, or moving through your third, that's when you have the most stereotypical idea of what a Mercury retrograde is. Like everything just like shuts down, or like something doesn't work, or you have to like do all these extra things. When I was living in New York, there was a period when Mercury was retrograde in my third, and like, I mean, every single day, like it would be like my commute was normally 30 minutes and it turned into an hour and a half because like 15 different things went wrong. And I don't know, that's just like a silly, like small thing.
No, I don't think it's silly,
Definitely.
because one of the things that I wrote down that I thought was fascinating is, you know, in modern astrology, we talk about Mercury being syncretized with the third house, right? Where does that come from? Well, it's actually not completely baseless.
Right,
So,
no, quite right.
It's actually Thoth. So Thoth was originally the god of the moon, and the scribe and the diviner of mysteries. So that would be Egyptian before the Greeks came along. And then eventually that becomes, you know, Hermes Trismegistus. So the scribe in particular, being a Thoth kind of signification, is about communication, but also about travel. And Thoth went between worlds. It was still a psychopomp. Thoth is Mercury in a nutshell, you know. Interesting that they also said it was the god of the moon at the same time. Obviously, the Egyptians have multiple gods that like kind of crossed over a lot like the Greeks. But in this case, it's kind of like, oh, well, that has a lot to do with it too. And like, yeah, Mercury retrograding in that third house, maybe it's not so much about like the third house is about Mercury, but I like to think about the planets, as you know, Zach, like there's multiple entities that the planets can appear as. We talk about that, especially like if you don't necessarily like connect with, let's say, Luna herself. Maybe instead it's Hecate or Persephone or another kind of lunar kind of goddess. Find the one that works for you, because their faces, I like to use that scripture from the Bible that says like, if you saw the face of God in its totality, you would melt, right? So like, it's about being palatable to our much smaller ability to take in their presence. And, you know, it's not about like Thoth is Mercury. It's more like Thoth has many faces too. And one of them was the moon, and one of them was a scribe, and one of them was a diviner. And so that third house kind of syncretization of like Mercury in the third house. Well, the moon was originally the messenger as well. The translator of light. So like, when that's disrupted, Like, it's not fun.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's a great point. Shall we? I guess one other thing I wanted to say, I can't not say about it. I know. We kind of talked about witchcraft, and I think in particular, the act of like gathering things in your locals. You know how you can make like a protection bag or something. Like I literally before my road trip across the country, I got some, it was so lunar now that I think about it, but I gathered some like holly leaves from the tree in front of my home. I got some spider webs from outside from there's a bunch of like really beautiful spiders in that tree. I found a robin's egg on the, just like all these things that kind of in my local space that kind of spoke to protection in some way, shape, or form. The act of gathering your like your herbs or anything in your local vicinity and kind of bringing it all together. It's like the witch brewing their pot. It's very, very third house. And that's another thing I just wanted to put out there, like the foraging, the creating, like the actual hands-on witchcraft work is very third house as well.
Well, I
What's
mean,
that? Go ahead, Zach. No, you first.
Okay. Well, I no, it's just like, you know, we were talking about earlier where it's like the ninth house might be the profound moment when you hear the voice of God or God, you know, a
Right.
goddess. But the third house is where we actually, if we're doing ritual, if we're doing like trying to connect with Venus, or we're giving offerings to Venus, or we're doing a devotion, that is the third house, right? The majority of our experiences with either the planets or, you know, even in just a religious space, if you're just, you know, like, you're not always having a profound experience. You are more regularly doing the ritual of what is like of like greeting that entity. Like, it is, hey, we do this. This is what we do it on this day because it's your day, and here are my offerings to you. Thank you for all that you do. And yeah, you know, like that ritual, and that whether it's gathering items and then giving it as offering, whether it's just a devotional practice or just a connection,
Lighting
that
a
is the majority.
candle, carving a candle, creating
Exactly.
sigils, all of that third
Exactly.
house.
Really third house, where the ninth is the profound, loud kind of connection, direct connection to the, like, tapping into
The
the full.
channeling.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's talk about it. Let's get into the house of the sun, the house of
Let's
God.
do it.
I'm like, do I originally wanted to title this episode the house of the God and the goddess, the houses of the God and the goddess, but I feel like it's like people are going to be like, what does that mean, and not click it. So 39th, but it's just like so beautiful to me, like the house of the goddess, the house of the God. The ninth house. Okay, traditional significations of the ninth house. This is the joy of the sun, and we're talking you know, above the horizon. The ninth house is that space after, so the midheaven is where the sun and all the planets culminate, meaning it's like kind of the highest point they get to in the sky before they start to set towards the west. And so the ninth house is that place right after the midheaven, when the sun, like after it reaches its highest point and starts to sort of drift down towards the western horizon. And that's where the sun has its joy. It is, again, forming this trine to the eastern horizon and the sextile to the western. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's able to sort of like cast its rays in a way that's not, it's not like the intense like overhead sunlight, but it's almost like, I like to think of it as just like this really like perfectly positioned spotlight almost. And yeah, the sun, we kind of talked about this, maybe we didn't, but the sun being this planet that has to do with illumination and sight. And you know, it is the star, like it is that eternal sort of emanating radiance, and it's constantly sort of transmitting some information to us. The moon reflects that light, but the sun is the light that is the source, right? It's like the moon doesn't produce its own light, it reflects that of the sun. And yeah, so and the planets too, like
As do the planets.
like all of them are just reflecting the light of the sun. And so when we're talking about the ninth house and its general significations, we want to think about the sun, like it's about how we see, right? But in a more macro sense. It's about, I like to say the ninth house is how we make sense of the world around us. And again, at this more macro way, where it's about our belief systems and our spirituality, and basically like the sun has so much to do with intelligence, and it's not necessarily like one person being more intelligent than another, but it's the intelligence that we like perceive of and we make sense of. So yeah, the ninth house is, it's that like how we see, if we're thinking about seeing from this like very high up perspective, it's like how we see the big picture of life, and make sense of that. And people tend to make sense of life based on things like, you know, belief systems, religions, mythos, these sort of stories that help us kind of ground into our own experiences. And, you know, back in the day when society was way more religious or even just spiritual in general, like, you know, we had the great Greek myths, and there's mythos in every culture and religion, or sorry, every culture. You know, every culture has their own mythos, whether or not it was preserved or not. They had it. So yeah, it's back in the day when we had more of that. You know, we can say what we want about organized religion and all of that, but I think that nowadays a lot of us are missing that. And there's this, and when people interview me and ask me about like, why are millennials and Gen Z so into astrology and tarot? And it's like, well, I feel like as, this is kind of getting away from the ninth house, but whatever, I'll just finish this point. As, you know, as a generation, and I'll just say kind of combining millennials and Gen Z, we have all sort of, not all, but a lot of us have sort of, you know, distance ourselves from organized religion, especially in our like adolescence and you know, teenage, young adult years, because of the hypocrisies, because of the harm, lots of harm that have been caused by dogmatic, the ways that religion has been translated and used. It's not necessarily that the religion's wrong, but I think that, yeah, as a generation, there's this, well, I guess even separate from that, I think as a society, a lot of us just feel very disconnected from something bigger than us, the macro, the big picture. And because we don't have these like overarching mythos in society and these sort of like tales that everyone knows of to sort of like help orient your life and sort of help make decisions and about morality and ethics and all of that, we don't really have that in the society as much. And so I think that millennials and Gen Z and folks in general, it doesn't even have to be just about our generations, but see astrology and other sort of, not that astrology is spiritual, but it can be, these other sort of mediums to help find that connection and help reconnect us to something larger than ourselves. And the ninth house is very much what is larger than ourselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and to go off of that too, I mean, like even for folks who, you know, who are atheists or, you know, agnostic, don't believe that there is like a higher being, or don't have a particular faith that they subscribe to. I think even in the ninth house, there is still profundity without it needing to be religion for them, right? It can be like people find profundity in find this profound knowing or understanding through academia, or through like asking bigger questions and answering them without, like, what does it mean if there isn't a God? Or what does it mean if there isn't divinity? And that's still a central, well, absolutely what you're saying is absolutely ninth house topics. The other thing too about the ninth is that it is also exploring what the absence of perhaps absence of the divine, and finding a profound knowing that allows for someone to explore how they know and what they know and how they sorry, I don't know if I'm saying that like this super clearly, but basically also find like the ninth house still rules things where we can find our own knowing without there needing to be the divine. There's both, and I think that's really beautiful.
What it makes me think of, Zach? It makes me think of how Neil deGrasse Tyson says he doesn't need religion because science is enough for him to believe in beauty.
Yes, right.
And it's about the philosophy and the exploration of something bigger than himself is spiritual enough for him.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
which, side note, like, I don't know, maybe not. I'm just like learning about like science and math and all that is literally what led me to spirituality. So I'm like, why stop there? But whatever. But
some people just go down a rabbit hole and never come back out of it. Yes. So you just got to let them do that.
That's true. But yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. Like, it does not have to be that you're believing in something in a spiritual way or a religious way. It's literally like what you believe, like how you what makes sense to you, right? And how you
Mm-hmm.
sort of conceptualize like life. And
Mm-hmm.
I always say the ninth house is sort of like it's your life philosophy. It's like that's where you would find things like philosophy.
Yeah.
It's how you make sense of things. And yeah, for some people that's like, getting really deep and spiritual and connecting to, spirit. And for some people that's like, just like a love and appreciation of like nature and natural, like, the cycles of nature. And that's like
Mm-hmm.
what they might base their worldview off of. Ninth house's worldview, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes me think
Yeah.
about how my brother's an atheist, and he is absolutely profoundly in awe of physics.
Yeah.
And like that's his religion in a sense.
Yeah.
He will spend hours meditating on it and feel very enlightened and nourished from it. And like he
Yeah.
kind of has a bigger picture of like what life is about.
I love that. Yeah. I
Absolutely.
always say like, if you want to know why someone is like maybe, well, I'll just say like looking at someone's ninth house will really give you an idea of like, how open-minded they are or not in a lot of ways. Because you'll have someone who might be very like, I'm a hippie, I'm like this or that. And I'm very like, I'm open, right? Like I'm such an open book, or I'm very open-minded. And then you see like Saturn Mars conjunction in the ninth house and you're like, are you sure? And like in a fixed sign, right? And so yeah, it's like the ninth house is very much just and I'm kind of making fun of myself in that way because I'm very mutable, I'm very like open, all that, go with the flow, Pisces rising. But like I have a Sun, Mars, Pluto conjunction in Scorpio
Right.
in the ninth
In the
house.
ninth.
And
Yeah.
my tunnel vision can get pretty tight, yeah, the way that I've been very aware of this lately because I have both the Sun and Mars perfected right now as Time Lord. So I've been in the ninth house quite a bit just internally. And and we can kind of talk about like the ninth house being about sight in a lot of ways, and how through my practice and doing client work, I find that I like when I'm doing astrology, like I'm in the ninth house. I'm very much just in my Scorpio stellium where I sort of get this I can get very clear sight, you can say, around like how something's going to pan out. It doesn't mean that I'm right all the time. It doesn't mean that I'm a psychic or anything like that. But that's just how my brain works. And I'm looking at a chart, like I get very clear. Some might say it's channeling, whatever. I can get very, very clear messaging around like how things might play out astrologically. And I have to check myself often because I can be really good at that, but oftentimes I can kind of get a little bit too, like I said, tunnel vision around that path. Especially when it comes to myself, which is why I get so many readings, because I'm like, I literally can only see it playing out this way, and I need someone else to tell me that that's like not the case. Especially because like my malefic contrary to sect is there, it's ruling that house. It can get a little bit I don't know, Mars can be a little cutthroat, I guess, and it can be like I can be a little cutthroat with myself when it comes to like, this is the only way it's going to work out and I'm doomed forever, and someone else is like, chill.
Well, and what you like bring that point up, but what you're highlighting is when you look at like the planets that are in the ninth and the planets that rule the ninth can tell us about how we experience religion, how we experience like those big ideas. Do we want to experience them at all? Do we want to like go, no, that's just not for me, I don't want to approach that?
Right.
Or is it a positive, or is it, if it's your ascendant ruler where you get to continuously are drawn to, and then perhaps that is you're continuously drawn to it, but it's a malefic contrary to sect, yeah, and then it's always a struggle, it's always a wrestling, it's always difficult to kind of deal with that experience because you're constantly drawn to it. but it's not always, it can regularly be a difficult experience or a difficult processing, it's a difficult thing to process and take on. So yeah, looking at the ruler as well as the planets inside that house can really give you again a flavor of how you're going to experience that, what your kind of life trajectory has been, or, perhaps when you were younger, how did you experience religion?
I wanted to bring that up because I had a really interesting experience, I guess, growing up when it comes to religion. So I was raised by two parents that were of totally different generations. That's not really even the point that I'm trying to make. I guess both of my parents were very anti-organized religion in that, like, they were both raised like in the church and sort of very much resented that. Like, they're both very, very, I would say they're both religious, but I would say they're more spiritual because they don't go to church. They're like not about that life, but they very much believe in God. And like, when we were growing up, we had to say grace. We said our nightly prayers, like that sort of thing. So they definitely wanted us to like believe in God. And in particular, my dad, I don't want to get into it too much, but basically, like, he when he was younger, sort of like entered into a more like extreme, I would call it radical, an extreme.
Maybe is the word like militant? I'm just thinking because Mars Pluto. Not necessarily.
I'll get into it because that definitely ties in. But yeah, I'm not gonna name what it is. But he raised his first 5 kids, or at least 4 kids, in this sort of religion. His ex-wife was part of it, and yeah, very militant in a lot of ways in terms of what was and wasn't like acceptable and allowed and all of that. And by the time he met my mom, who was like very much not a part of this at all, he was still like involved, but not as super involved as he was when he was younger and raising kids, before obviously he raised us. But yeah, so but I guess what I'm getting at is that was still very much like in our household, and like the literature and the media that he consumed was very much like this. And I personally, like, I'm like, it's propaganda, like whatever. But that's he does his own thing. He's also a Scorpio too, right? So I have my Scorpio sun, 9th house Scorpio sun, conjunct Mars and Pluto. He's a very Martian person. And in the sun, often relates to the father in the chart. So I grew up with a shit ton of resentment around his religious, whatever he did religiously. So much resentment around it. I also grew up with a lot of resentment around Christianity too, because while they didn't like make us go to church or anything, the first couple years of my like schooling, like pre-K and into kindergarten, was at a Christian school. And we, like, all of my cousins went there. We all went to the school. And so, yeah, from really early on was like asking a lot of questions, mostly internally, where I wrestled with this a lot as a kid around, if God's supposed to be so like loving, then like why can't I do this thing? Why is this a sin? Why is that a sin? Why are gay people sinning if God made them? And like, I don't get it. Like, it's never made sense to me. And I wrestled with this stuff a lot as a kid, like not externally. It was just in my head, very 9th house. Like, it was all very internally. Like, I did not really ask questions about it. It wasn't really like stuff I talked about, but I had like a pretty, I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but I had a pretty like intense, it was never diagnosed or anything, because I don't want to call it like OCD, but obsession around prayer for a long time. And I was literally constantly praying as a kid. Like, in my head. Yeah. Oh, intense Pluto shit. Like,
Mm.
because I thought if I stopped praying that bad things would happen. So I was
Ooh.
constantly praying. I think a lot of people, when 9/11 happened, like a lot of people with obsessive issues, like thought it was their fault because they didn't do something, stuff like that. Thinking things were my fault because I wasn't praying enough, or I wasn't praying for I wasn't praying for the right people. So I would pray for I would do these prayers that were just like, I would try to include everyone that I could think of in my prayers to make sure that they were like accounted for. Right. So like my cousins and like my friends and their families and like their friends, like just didn't want to leave anyone out because like was afraid that something, so this is very
Wow,
Sun,
that's
Mars,
so
Pluto
like,
conjunction
so
in
it's
spot
Scorpio in
so
the
on.
ninth.
Mars to be like,
It's
I have
so
to be
Mars.
prepared and like
Yeah.
make sure everybody's
Because
And it's
taken
my
care of.
responsibility. It's square
Right,
Saturn.
and it's you have it's just like such a perfect example of like, I mean, really your specific dynamic, but like obviously we say a lot of times, like we say like, okay, so obviously it's your malefic contrary sect, but it's a malefic contrary sect in its domicile,
own sign,
and it therefore, and like ruling that house, conjunct Mars, obviously conjunct the sun as well, but it's like there's this just because, I don't know, it's a difficult conversation, but it's like just because something is a malefic is strong, or at least in its own domicile, and therefore can make the rules, doesn't mean that's enjoyable.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we like it. I mean, the malefics aren't about us enjoying anything, really. So like, I think that's like one of the things is like when we call that a mitigating factor to a certain degree, it's like, yeah, sure, only because Mars can do what it wants, not because it's actually
and
more,
Mars just went haywire, and
right.
and
Especially
and also my
conjunct
Mars is
Pluto.
hidden. It's very combust.
Exactly.
It's completely hidden. So this was, again, I honestly don't think I've ever told anyone said that out loud because it has all been so hidden. Like, my Mars shit is so intense. But also I have to show this sweatshirt because I wore it specifically for this. It says "Too possessed to be stressed."
Oh my God.
Which is like such a ninth house.
That's
such
hilarious.
A ninth house mood, too possessed to be stressed by small spells. But anyway, yeah. So I just went deep into like a Scorpio trench around my ninth house situation. But just
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, but yeah, just to sort of paint a picture around like how the ninth house can manifest, especially my story around like, my dad and his sort of religion, and I was always just I still am just like so averse to it. And yeah, really rejecting organized religion really early on, after, because it was causing me agony, like the whole praying thing. It was just like
Mars conjunct your sun, making you feel like I have to do this or else everybody's gonna suffer.
It
like
was
Mars
agonizing.
and Scorpio will totally like take the suffering on themselves so that nobody else has to. And in that ninth house, it's like, I'll do it with God. I'll wrestle with God personally.
Right.
Yes. But then of course that that was earlier on. And then I was basically, I would call myself agnostic, most of my childhood and into high school and all that. I still always had a very deep sense of connection to something. I just felt really weird about God, like using that word and like whatever it was, and still didn't have spirituality yet until Saturn entered Scorpio in 2012. I had my closing Saturn square. Astrology popped into my life to never leave, and that was all Saturn moving through Scorpio, my ninth. Yeah, I had I think right before that started, I was in a ninth house perfection. Yeah, right before that started, had just finished a ninth house perfection when I saw my chart for the first time. And then Saturn moving through my ninth. There was also eclipses happening, North Node eclipses in my ninth house.
Just a lot of stuff all at once.
All of it. And then also Neptune started to transit towards my ascendant at this time too. So that's when spirituality really came in for me, and astrology, like, and that's when I really started to like develop a better connection with spirit. And it's been 8 years, and that's kind of been the journey that I've been on. So yeah, that's a little bit about my ninth house shit. But I guess just to like I find that ninth house people, there's just this knowing that comes with ninth house people, and yeah, there's sight there. It's sight, and it's a very like particular type of sight where it's about clarity and vision and being able to sort of see farther out, because again, I'm kind of picturing the sun up high up in the sky. It has this like kind of perfect view of everything. It's not like directly overhead where it's it might be a little bit too harsh, that sunlight. But the ninth house sunlight is yeah, like I said, it's sort of like that spotlight. Ninth house sun, Zacc, what do you have to say about the ninth?
The ninth house is fascinating to me. I mean, yeah, I guess if I just talking about my experience, so I have Gemini rising with Mercury on the midheaven in the ninth, trining my ascendant back to my ascendant, the moon applying to that Mercury. So ninth house Mercury related stuff is like huge for me. I was always very connected to the divine from a very like young age. It was wildly overwhelming. When I was really young, it just I saw too much, and it was really overwhelming. But and so there was kind of like a period of just like shutting everything down because I really couldn't deal with all of it. There was like, I mean, that's just such a powerful signature of the ruler of my ascendant exactly on the midheaven, trining back to the ascendant, with the moon applying to it as well. There was just
like
kind of
easy
like
access.
Yeah, very much. And then I think the other factor to it is that it is a combust Mercury, so the sun is within 8 to 9 degrees of it. Of this, Mercury is within 8 to 9 degrees of the sun. So there was confusion on what to do with that, right? So it took me a lot of time and work to figure that out. But from other signatures were like I started learning foreign language at the age of 6, and I grew up with family members who lived in and were from Paris and France, and so like I had like a natural like connection to French. So I started with Spanish, and then then in high school, like I started taking French as well, and then I skipped a year of French, and then like I was taking two languages all throughout high school, and then most of college too. So foreign language was like a huge thing for me, and I've always so the ruler of my first and the ruler of my fourth are both Mercury, and again that's in the ninth. And so I've noticed that kind of signification as being like I've always said, well, I guess there's two things I could say about this, but that like I was born in the wrong continent, that like I was not like this country that I'm in, it feels so foreign, and so out of where I mean, it doesn't connect with how I think about things, how I believe my worldview in any way. It doesn't really, I don't connect I've always felt out of place and out of sorts, which is a very like sun in Aquarius thing regardless, but it really does. I've really seen that expressed where I just kind of don't feel like I fit into the like cultural space I've grown up in. And then the other way I've like definitely seen this is like, the ruler of my ascendant being in the ninth, as compared to many people in my family so I have like a lot of air and fire in my chart, mostly air, and then mostly in the ninth. And a lot of my family is like earth and water. And then as I said, my mom's ascendant ruler is in the third. So the way I've described that truly has been, this is before, I've said this phrase before I knew about new astrology, but I'm a thinker in a family full of doers. So there was always this tension. Well, why don't you just do it? I'm like, because I have to know why. I have to know why. I cannot act without understanding the underlying reason for which I'm acting like that. Or if I'm making a decision, the decision has to connect with my worldview. And if I don't understand how that fits in, I have to ponder it, meditate on it, and really like, okay, how does this piece together? And how am I going to ensure that I'm always in my integrity, in my understanding of what I know to be true for myself, in my own knowing. Like that was always a constant thing that I did. I had to always evaluate before acting, which I think is like the big contrast between having an ascendant ruler in the ninth versus having an ascendant ruler in the third. It's just I can't just do. I have to think before I do. Yeah, I don't know. Those were like huge themes in my life growing up, and still kind of are very much a part of myself.
You know what? That's why we get along so well, because like I don't have an air ninth house, but I have that moon up in the ninth. And I had so many of the same stuff, but for me, it was like, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. So I can't do that. You have to explain why. And maybe it'll help me make me feel better. But like,
wait,
it drove my family nuts.
we all have the ruler of the ninth and the ninth.
Oh, we do.
We all have the ruler of the ninth and domicile.
That's so wild. Yeah, that
I
makes
love
sense.
that. Wow. Yeah. And astrology is a ninth house topic,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And you'll often find astrologers with some ninth house situation going on.
I mean, Zacc though has Mercury, the patron of astrology, on his midheaven in the ninth house. Like, could that get any more literal?
Yeah.
And
it's
how
very,
much have
very
I
literal.
like the amount of time I spent denying being an astrologer? Of course, Saturn is the ruler of my ninth and in the ninth, and of course it took a while for that to actually me to take it on. It took until my Saturn returned for me to. It was like truly when Saturn hit my natal Saturn. That's when I said, "Oh, I'm going to be an astrologer."
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to sort of talk about a couple general significations, I'm actually going to reshare my houses wheel. So we're up here in the ninth house. We talked about spirituality and religion a lot, but we also have travel here as well, more long distance travels. I call it journeying. Like the ninth house is about taking journeys. And journeying does not have to mean physical travel, and oftentimes it doesn't. If you're tripping, you take a trip, right? That could mean going on a physical journey. It could mean, taking some psychedelics and going on a trip. Both are ninth house. It's about taking a journey, and oftentimes ninth house trips or journeys or travel is more like the experience will be more of like about your mind, your worldview, like kind of shaping and changing your worldview through through different experiences in different places. We also have academia here in the ninth, academia and higher education.
Zacc is like highly, highly educated. He's being really modest, but he's like Mr. Smarty Pants over there.
Yeah, because it's like and you mentioned this earlier, Zacc, but it's like the third house is more of like the primary education, like K through 12, and sort of
foundations, the fundamentals.
Foundational, exactly. Like the facts. I like to say it's like the facts of life, which
absolutely.
Yeah. So it's more about solidifying all that, whereas the ninth house takes it a step further. Let's expand on this. Let's let's take this to another level. And so any type of study in higher education, we'll find that there. I mean, for me, Saturn entered my ninth in 2012. Within a month, probably within weeks, is when I saw my birth chart for the first time. And literally from that day forward, I did not sleep that night. I started studying. Like I just started learning. And that entire like 2.5 year long period of Saturn through my ninth was me like consuming everything I could about astrology. And just like that was the most study that I'd done in astrology. It was those first like 2-3 years with Saturn moving through my ninth. And it's always really exciting to me. I get clients who a lot of Gemini rising clients, honestly, who have Saturn moving through their ninth, or Saturn entered in their ninth last year. And so many of them found astrology at that time. And it's always exciting for me because that was the transit for me with Saturn through the ninth. So yeah, that if you are a Gemini rising or even if you're a Taurus rising, and that might have come up for you in the past couple of years, it's like Saturn moving through the ninth and sort of bringing astrology, or if it's not astrology, another type of like subject. I think what I've seen a lot is just people becoming more spiritual with Saturn in the ninth, and like just being more interested in learning astrology and tarot and just like mindset sort of, you know, a lot of self-help type of stuff happens when planets move through their ninth, or especially Saturn, because it's about really solidifying your worldview and solidifying your like your philosophies and figuring out like how you want to move through the world. Also want to give a shout out.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, shouting out to Virgo risings who have Uranus moving through their ninth now.
Oh my goodness.
And sort of like breaking up and like kind of causing a lot of disruptions in their worldview and how they experience, you know, the life around them. And it's like probably a lot of shocking revelations and realizations around like, oh, I don't have to hold that belief anymore. Like, I don't have to believe that, like, I don't have to believe this anymore, or I can shift my beliefs and change my life. Like, I think that's very much a ninth house sentiment, is like, change your beliefs, change your life, you know, change the way that you're experiencing the world, change your perspective. That's the word, changing your perspective, change your mind, change your life, all that sort of stuff. And that's not like in a bypassing sort of way where it's like, you just got to believe it and it'll be true. Like, not in that way, but there's definitely some truth to, you know, mindset work and belief work. And personally, with like my Mars there in the ninth, and ruling my second house, a lot of the work that I've been doing over past couple years, honestly, has been around mindset work around money and like, you know, how to, you know, be okay with making money and how to sort of remove a lot of like especially ancestral like kind of blockages around you know, wealth and abundance and all that. So I
was just going to say, and mundanely too, you know, having those ninth house activations can just be, you know, someone going back to school, getting a graduate degree or a PhD. That's something that absolutely happens when someone's having those transits through the ninth.
Or in my case, expanding to an entire suite of classes instead of just one. Because
yes, exactly.
You could also be the teacher.
You could also absolutely, you could be the teacher. Yeah.
That's and that's where I'm at right now too. Like, I'm about to launch a course in a month, and
Congrats.
just thank you.
So exciting.
Just majorly shifted towards teaching. And it's funny because I remember being young and being like, I like teaching, but like I can never be a teacher. I used to think that, like, basically thinking I'm not Mercury enough, like I'm not like organized enough and all that. But here I am about to fucking teach.
I love it.
Or have been teaching even. Another thing I wanted to bring up about the ninth house is broadcast and publishing. Because really it is the space where we disseminate information on a large scale. And that can be teaching, right? Like I kind of picture like a college professor sitting in like this room with like 200 students and sort of just like sharing. It could also be like a preacher, like, you know, sharing the good word, you know, disseminating this information. It's also things like what we're doing right now, podcasting, anything like television. It's sharing information, and then publishing as well. And me being in such a ninth house person, you know, I published my magazine, Influx Mag, that's coming back next year. So I'm thinking of the publisher for my book. I know his chart, and he has a ninth house sun. Ninth house, like, I think it's a stellium, honestly, but at least Sun and Mercury in the ninth house. And he owns a publishing house, and that's like his jam. So publishing is another big part of that. Whereas, like, in contrast, the third house would be more, it's more of the teaching and learning, but again, on the micro scale. So skill shares or anything, like I think of third house as like classes, like taking a webinar, like you learn something, you know, tune into a Fresh Voices webinar. That might be more of like a third house type of learning experience. Whereas like ninth house would be more of like taking a course and kind of engaging in a more broader area of study.
I mean, it's the third house, ninth house axis is the media axis, right? So there's the ninth, it tends to be, publishing those like longer term projects that require a lot more work, that require this extensive knowledge, that require, publishing a book is absolutely the writing of that media access. I think the third can be those daily things, right? Writing if you're doing a daily or weekly column. If
I
you're
was going to say like your local news.
Your local news. I mean, sometimes
news.
also just podcasts, because podcasts are regular things that come out and are providing information. And so, like it's kind of, that's such a great point. We should have brought that up, I guess, earlier. But like this third ninth is the media axis. And it's just kind of, again, when we're thinking about the third house being fundamentals, it's like, and the short distance travel, it's like those things that are regular and mundane, kind of, again, subterranean. So in the earth, so they're like the grounded ideas of just like regular, let's go, let's hit it. And then the ninth being those like longer term things where you have to sit and wrestle with ideas and actually and take your time. And I guess I probably feel that even more because I have Saturn there as the ruler and in that ninth house. So I'm like, yes, ninth house things take like hours and weeks and years to like be able to develop them. So I probably am a little bit biased about that, but definitely.
I was just thinking, I just thought of something with you, Zach, like you have the ruler of your third in the ninth house as the sect leader, and how you bring a lot of like your kind of like signature offering is like kind of bringing in the third house topics like the ritual and the spiritual, like the witchcraft, more part of, I think it's more of like the what's the word I'm looking for, like the developing a relationship with divine, but what's the word I'm looking for, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Establishing a relationship with the divine.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then kind of bringing that into this ninth house space where it's like you're making this like kind of part of what you're disseminating out to the world. It's like kind of, you have such that nice connection between the third and the ninth in that way.
Well,
it really makes me think about like how if you get on a call with him, he's like, oh, hold on, I have to go do my Mercury thing.
Yeah.
And like he'll be sitting there talking to Mercury while you're, and if he doesn't like mute himself, you'll hear him in the other room. He's like, doing his prayers, and then they're chit chatting, and he's like, but he's doing the thing while also having that direct kind of channel. That's so like a combination of the two, which is so delightful to like be a witness to, because
it is so cool.
He's so good about that. He really is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Oh my goodness, that's so kind. I think that another definite like ninth house thing is I'm having my Saturn return coming to my natal Saturn this year, and I not only decided I finally let myself become an astrologer, but it jump started a massive ritual and magical practice that absolutely, like honestly it might be my favorite offering is doing like Serve for the Stars is what I called it, because I just love that name. Anyway, there is a reference, but we don't need to go into it. But it's just, I think there's just something so profound and lovely about, I think, regular ritual and like connection with like the divine and with the stars and with the planets is just so special and important. And I think it like Amaya like also mentioned, because she is also doing these things, and she's like, so many people signed up for that reading with her, and the same thing happened to me, and I was like, actually, honestly, genuinely as well surprised. I was like, really? I thought people like do this all the time. Like, I just didn't know, because it's just. But I think what I've come to understand with that is that like, it's regularly, we overly mystify what ritual means.
Absolutely.
We overly mystify.
Thank you, capitalism.
Right. We make it so grandiose and powerful, and like, I mean, it's beautiful and profound, but it doesn't have to be. Ceremonial magic is fine and beautiful and can have its place. However, it doesn't have to be that at all to have actually the same exact experience. Ceremonial magic I've seen to be something that some people need to really get focused. Right?
Yeah.
Having all of those tasks, dressing like it, all these, like bringing all these things together and doing all of these things are their way of getting so intensely focused and intense. Like the intention of their action is so focused and directed in that moment that they need to do this like really large ceremony to like really tap in. And that's great and like wonderful, but it also sometimes when the way people kind of talk about it, they make it seem like it's an exclusive club, and it genuinely is not. Magic is easy. Connecting with, well, relatively easy. I just mean to say, like, it might not be easy to always like receive. That's like, it might be a little bit harder, but like you can do the third house thing, right, of the continual ritual, and by building that over time, it can grow and you can have more of those profound experiences. But again, even people who overly mystify these kinds of things, they don't actually experience that entity all the time. They don't have profound experience. Sometimes they just do third house stuff. Actually, the majority, even for me, when like it's very easy for me to connect, just it truly is, it has to be that Mercury on the midheaven, right? Like I'm just able to directly connect. But it's even for me, it's like the majority of what I do is just the ritual part, lighting a candle, saying the Orvachim, saying thank you for just being in my life and like changing my life in this experience that I've been having of doing this like daily rituals, daily ritual work. Because the devotion, as Amaya should absolutely talk more about, is the important part. They like love
you took a great
devotion.
job.
That's the word I was looking for.
Oh, okay.
Oh yes,
Devotional.
Zach is
Devotional.
so devoted. I mean, like he took what I teach in my class, which is super basic, to a completely different level. And he really just does such a beautiful job with it. I always tell people, like, the ancients didn't think that these hyper mystical things were normal. Like if you went to the crossroads to give an offering to Hecate, an epiphany, which we think of as, again, Moses in the burning bush and oh my gosh, she's there, was like if a dog was baying, because a dog was one of her epiphanies. And like anyone could be walking around with their hunting hound. But if you were at the crossroads giving an offering to Hecate,
right. And at
that hound at that moment, it was like, okay, she's present with me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different things, like an owl hooting is the same thing. Things that honestly are so mundane in our perspective, because we've made like we've really mystified what this devotion and this magic can be. Actually, that's what you need to pay attention to, because then you know you're connected all the time. You don't have to do anything particularly crazy or special. You just have to be present. And I think that's what the connection between the ninth and third is about, is if you meet in the middle between them, where you are in that relation with the world around you, which is what witchcraft really is about relation with the world around you. And you're also being open to listening and being in communication with that higher space. Yeah. That's where it actually comes alive, and it doesn't ever have to go back to sleep. Right. It can be alive for you from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed to the time you're sleeping and you're dreaming. That's what the beauty of these two houses coming together really is. You need both, not just one.
Speaking of, ninth house is also where we traditionally find dreams. And, you know, there's a lot of like debate around 12th house, ninth house, is which one's dreams. But
and also Amaya's mentioned third house too, right? That like traditionally.
Yeah, the very earliest texts are like the third house because the moon's joy. And there was a few different cults to dream divination and oracular visions, but it then does get shifted to the ninth house later on in the Hellenistic tradition. And they have some really good points. I think both points are very good points, right? Because getting a vision from something would be a very ninth house thing, in my opinion. Like it's a direct divination in a sense, right? But it's also very lunar. So I think that it can be a little both. But I do think it's a little more direct and ninth housey than necessarily third housey.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like dreams being these visions, right? And that is very ninth house, like vision, sight, sun, joy.
Well, and also just, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to go off of what Amaya said, you know, like obviously, as many people know, Venus is really, really important to me. And I think in my talking to many people about Venus and pushing as many people to do Venus devotion as possible, I think, I mean, there's many reasons why I say that, because I think there's just so much goodness that can bring. But, you know, talking about these, those, you know, epiphany being these mundane things, right? So many people who I've like talked about doing Venus rituals with and have started, it's not, again, it's not necessarily a profound ninth house thing that they're experiencing, but just like starting a Venus practice or using Venus materia or having a Venus talisman can just simply be being able, when you're going on a walk, being able to, like, when you're normally just like in your head, you're like focused, you're just going on your walk and you're doing it, being able to slow down and notice like, oh my gosh, I've never noticed those flowers before on my walk.
Stop and smell the roses. Yeah.
Like truly stop and smell the roses. I mean, I've heard people truly say, like, yes, like I genuinely noticed for the first time that there was this gorgeous rose bush on this walk that I go on every single day. And I had never noticed it until I started doing this Venus ritual. That like stopping and noticing the beautiful things that are in your life that can bring you joy in small in moments
just,
that you're just
being
like,
able to like experience pleasure basically in like the little things. Very quickly when I was in my third house perfection, which is ruled by Venus, I walked more probably than I ever have in my life, and I was just walking around Brooklyn all the time, and literally stopping to
Venus
smell.
third house thing, going on a stroll, like
going on walks, like as much as possible basically. And I did a lot of I talked to so many trees. I hugged and like touched and talked to so many plants and trees on my walk my walks around like the neighborhood. And I mean,
very tourist of you. I'm really impressed.
It was so far. And I totally like took that, like that was so loud to me during this was 4 years ago, I guess at this point, 3 years. But that's something I still take with me. Like whenever I'm on a walk, it's just like, I'm constantly saying what's up to the trees that I've had, any sort of plant life that I come across, because that was so loud for me during my third house Venus perfection. Yeah. Oh, I'm excited for my next one. Now that I think about it. But what else did I want to say about the ninth? Oh, I think this is a good time to sort of wrap up, and I'm going to do a very quick rant about cadent houses, and especially third and the ninth. But before, does anyone have anything else to add about the ninth? Probably no.
I feel like have we covered everything?
We covered a lot.
We did cover a lot. We went in depth in specific things.
Into it,
but,
yeah.
I love the ninth house, obviously. Ninth house, still, I guess I'm very biased.
You know, if we're gonna like help people understand it in a very fundamental way, I would say like the ninth house is kind of like the Hierophant card in the tarot, and the third house is like the High Priestess.
Yes.
Ooh,
and so like Hierophant needs to know all the details, knows the theology, gets the immediate messages from God and disseminates it to the people, right? Sure. High Priestess is that lady on the edge of town that you're like, I don't know what's up with my kid and nothing's working. Can you help me? And she reads the divination in the trees or the bones, and she gives you the weird medicine that you're like, I hope that this isn't poison. Like, you know?
It is a little bit poison, but it's the right amount of poison for you.
Well, poison's medicine in the right house.
Poison is medicine.
And that's such a astute point, about the priestess, because the priestess is like a card that, especially I guess in the deck that I use, that like she is not necessarily straightforward. It's not like, it isn't a direct message. It is very just like layered. Here's something that you can do. Layered, and it's a very mysterious card. Especially in the deck I have, it's like a very like beautiful, austere, like kind of like woman or femme, that stay like sitting on this like moon-shaped chair. This crescent-shaped chair, and and she's just like looking at you, but like kind of in a like truly in a mysterious way of like, will I give you the answer? Will you understand the answer? Who knows? And it's just, I think that's so astute. I love that, Amaya. Thank you for adding that.
I also think it's like kind of like going to the shaman, right? And I know that this is like mostly fiction, but it makes me think of like Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda, right? And it's very like, go do the thing. Shut up, go do the thing. I don't care, go do the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And it can be very, whereas like the ninth house is like, here's a mystery. Unveil the koan. Think harder about this. Go into meditation. Take these mushrooms and see what the gods tell you, you know, like, and so like you need both, because you can't always be like, just go do the thing, right? Right. But you also can't always be like, I'm going to go sit in my settee and like get the visions. You have to do both.
Unless you're me. No, I'm just kidding.
And he's like, that's where Venus comes in, right? Because then I have my pool boy that's going to come bring me my food while I have my vision.
Yes. I love
Girl
that.
Can dream, okay? The exalted Venus in the 10th desires that as well.
Speaking of why astrologers all deserve pool boys. No.
Here we go, Kirah. Let's hear this rant. I'm ready.
No, so I just wanted to, I've ranted about this on Clubhouse before, but just wanted to say that like the work that we do as astrologers, as tarot readers, as readers in general, as diviners, is work. It is labor. And as we've talked about before with cadent houses and how planets there are often, it's like they are treading water, right? They spend a lot of energy trying to stay afloat and trying to like juggle, manage all the things that come with cadency. And so it's labor, and the work that we're doing is work. And even if that work is happening, you know, invisibly, or it's happening in our heads, it's happening in our little, like in our homes, in our kitchens, whatever, what have you,
In our studying.
in our studying. Yes, it is work. And for me particularly, the ruler of my sixth house, which is more like your physical, the things that you need to do to maintain your physical health, is in my ninth. The sun rules my sixth house, so there is that direct connection between physical labor and mental labor. And for a lot of us, like
Mm-hmm.
this mental work manifests physically. It very much will like the work that we're doing, divining, and in our heads, and in our, I would say, like in our bellies too, in a lot of ways, in our guts. It manifests physically. And so yeah, I guess when we're talking about, like, I've talked about on Clubhouse quite a bit about, like, charging, what to charge for the work that we're doing. And even talking about like how I believe there should be some sort of standardized pricing when it comes to this type of work. And that's not to say that everyone needs to charge the same, but I'm speaking more in terms of like minimums, and that, like, like, you wouldn't go to a lawyer and kind of like expect to pay $20 for like an hour of their time, or even
to
like
get it for free.
$60 for an hour of their time.
Right.
Yeah, all the people that'll approach us and be like, can you just like look at my chart? And you're
Yeah, real quick.
No, I can't. And the big thing is, like, we're also channels, right? That's what part of divination is.
Exactly.
It is exhausting to let something in and
Yes.
also hold space for you as our client at the same time. It's like a lot of energy all at once, plus the mental energy of like looking at the chart, thinking about the techniques.
Yes.
Like, it's all happening simultaneously. And so to go to someone and say, can you do this for me for free? Or to complain about their prices, or for some of the younger astrologers who often it's usually imposter syndrome, where they're like, I'm just going to charge $20 and you can get a full reading. It's like you're setting up this expectation that what we do is not that complex, and that it's not worth very much.
Exactly. Which is why I tell people at the bare minimum, and $1 a minute for your time, like that it should be the absolute bare minimum. And maybe I shouldn't use the word should, but because everyone's different, and there's differences in different places in the world and different communities and all of that. But just know that there should be an exchange and of some sort when it comes to this type of work. And that's whether you are a reader or you're someone who sees readers. There needs to be an exchange, because I think about, like, we're a community when it comes to not even just astrologers, but readers, diviners. Like, we're a community. And I think as a community, if we take ourselves more seriously in terms of this labor, that we can all get paid more, right? We can all raise our prices in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying that I want to make this inaccessible for people, but it's just, know that this is labor, this is work. And when it comes to like content creation and like, writing horoscopes for your brand, like, exposure is not enough, because
Oh God, the exposure myth.
it's almost never enough, honestly. And yeah, I just want to put that out there, that, pay us.
And was it that
Yeah.
Cardi B got into an argument on TV and she was like, why shouldn't she ask you for money?
Yeah.
Like, she's going to do all this for you and then she's going to have your baby and then you're not going to do anything, right? Like there's no shame in it, but it's the same for diviners. Like, we don't just spend time with you in the moment being a diviner.
Right.
We've probably prepped, we've bought software, we've taken classes.
Years of study.
Years of study.
Years. This is not, I mean, if you have someone who's just started astrology and is giving readings, bad sign. They need a little bit more
giving
time.
readings for it's
For
like you can give reading,
readings.
but not.
Oh yeah, you need to practice,
You
but
need to
like
practice. Yeah.
you're not a pro yet. You know, professional means that you've put a lot of time and energy into training yourself.
Yeah.
And it's more than that. Like, do you like us having food? Do you like us eating so that we can actually like have these conversations with you?
Having a space to do this in.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
And
of that.
to go off of that, it's like the work we do is represented by cadent house, right? So, or by cadent houses. And so, yeah, it's not as visible. You don't notice that work is a lot, but it doesn't mean it's any less valuable.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it sucks that we're in a capitalist system and we require resources in order to be able to survive. That we can have that conversation, but that is not
it's just
the point in this. We still need resources. We do have to deal with that. And honestly, it is capitalist to ask for someone to produce labor without paying them.
Right.
It's an exploitation.
Without exchange of some sort.
Yeah, exchange.
Right, some kind of exchange. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. It's an exploitation of labor.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, we just have to start realizing and taking I guess it's not astrologers who need to take ourselves seriously. We do, right? It's that other people, when they're coming to us, need to take us seriously. That the work that we do is serious. And so asking those things that you find to be a minor question isn't minor. You don't know the answer because the answer is something that we've had to study over a long period of time, that we've had to wrestle with, that we've had to, doing the ninth house thing of doing the long labor.
The existential crises.
Yeah.
It's built into the job. Do you know what? We need therapists. We have to pay for therapy.
Hello. Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. And so I guess it's just like not minimizing. Don't minimize the question that you're asking, because honestly, it's taken us a really long time to be able to give that answer.
To be able to give that answer and not just speak astrology language too. Like that is something that takes so much labor.
An approachable, yes.
To be able to be
and
like,
well, love depth.
Yes, like for me to be able to describe your Mercury placement means I have to engage not just like, oh, well, it's Mercury in the 10th house, conjunct the midheaven, trine, Saturn, whatever. I can't just tell that to you and have it make sense to you, right? So I have to do all of the work to translate astrology into like normal speak, just so you can grasp that. And then it's like, well, and I'm also going to want to talk about, what your Mercury is doing, the houses that it's ruling, like its condition, all that stuff. And so just to, again, kind of to wrap up this rant, 3rd house, 9th house work is work, and it's labor. Just because it's mental doesn't mean it isn't. And I guess just one other thing I'll say, if you are a young astro out there or starting out, and you're having issues around like imposter syndrome, or not really sure if it's time for you to start charging, find other astrologers in the same boat as you, because there are so many out there. Trade services and
meaning like trade readings, like reading for readings.
If another readings. Person who's studying it gives you a good review,
exactly,
it's a really good sign that you're on the road.
Right. Get feedback, like give each other feedback, write each other testimonials. I am doing my best to create some sort of space for those connections to happen. So give me a couple months while I figure that out. But I find this to be an issue for so many young or up and coming, astrologers, that, it's like you think you're ready, but you're not really sure, and you're like afraid to start charging, there's so many people out there like you who you guys just need to like start reading for each other and gathering some reviews, and that will give you the confidence to move forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, rant's over. Episode over. We've been talking for forever.
But it's been so great. I mean,
so ninth house,
honestly,
third house.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say. I was like very spot on. Ninth house, third house. That this episode is longer. Yeah.
Thank you for if you're still with us, thanks for sticking in there.
You deserve an award.
Yes. And
may you have a vision in your sleep or something.
Yes.
Maybe we'll all show up in your dreams.
Because
that's
what happens a lot. I'm so sorry. Zach's like, I'm just gonna strap me. I'm like, I'm gonna go hide. I think that's a terrible idea.
Amaya, tell us where folks can find you and learn more about you and your offerings.
Heartwarriorpath.com. You can find me on Twitter underneath Feral Vinifica, which is impossible to spell. And I just opened an Instagram, Heart Warrior Path.
Heart Warrior Path. Awesome. And you offer readings and classes, correct?
I do. And I think in March I'll be opening a Patreon.
Yay.
So
cool. Yeah. Awesome. And Zach, how about you?
Yeah, my socials are, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Zacc, Z-A-C-C Powell, P-O-W-E-L-L. My readings are open. I do natal and year ahead readings, as well as the other reading that I mentioned, Serve for the Stars, which I help people through engaging with particular, looking at their chart, working with their chart to figure out, what are they going through in their life right now? And what do they want? Where do they want? What area of their life are they trying to boost? Where are they trying to kind of move into a new path? And looking at the transits they're going through and the rulers of that house, and kind of coming up with an action plan to kind of help with creating a relationship with those planets to boost that area of your life. And so I really, really love doing that work, and because of my ninth house stellium, I love doing that work, and I'm really excited about it. But and then the other thing that I'm newly going to start doing is, it's also creating a Patreon where I'm going to do daily writing about basically daily planetary reflections, where I'm going to write each day about each planet, kind of like, not necessarily like just what comes through, but it will. I didn't want to just do horoscopes, because I love that, and I think there's great work that people are doing, but I really wanted to expand it and kind of include magical stuff and talking about the deities that are reflected in those planets. So I'm going to do daily planetary reflections.
Yeah, and everyone should book Zach, because right now my readings are closed. I'm closed for the foreseeable future. So go book Zach.
Love to hear it. And yes, Zach, I've had a Serve for the Stars reading. It was phenomenal. If you're looking for a way to connect with planets and don't really understand like the A's and B's of starting a devotional practice, hit up Zach. He's the
guy.
Well, friends, thank you so much for joining me today. Amaya is all the way in Ireland, and so it's nighttime. Zach's in Philly, and so it's like evening, right? And it's afternoon for me. I have another podcast to record today.
Oh my god!
Oh my goodness, you're a machine.
A lot today. Thank God for this Mercury talisman, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.